Preston is, and this is Miranda. She's the curator of this exhibition, so we're going to let them take us through, tell us all about it. So.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. This has been a really long show in the making. I came on the project 4 years ago, and Preston has been working on it for even longer. And it really started with him and his mentor, Walter Porter, who was an elder from the Tlingit village of Yakutat, and really inspiring Preston to work on in a narrative thread through his work, and to use his amazing sculptures and different objects to tell stories. Now, both Preston and I are part Tlingit, and from your mother's side?
Correct.
From both of our mother's side, and we have such a rich oral history, as all indigenous cultures do. And our community, Raven is a trickster figure. Is everybody familiar with Raven? And for us, Raven is not God. He's not the creator, but he has had a major role to play in shaping the world around us. And there's dozens and dozens of stories of Raven intervening into the natural process and helping to shape the world that we live in. Now, we have many different Raven stories, and we have many different versions of each of those stories. And so this is Raven in the Box of Daylight. Sometimes it's called Raven Steals the Sun. Sometimes it's called Raven and the Stars, the Moon, and the Sun. There's variations of the title, but it's always about Raven going and finding the daylight that has been hoarded by a wealthy man and releasing it into the world. Now, for this exhibition, this is in depth in the exhibit, in the intro essay, right as we enter. But we acknowledge that there are many different versions of this story, and we really paid close attention to 5 different versions of this story, all told by Tlingit storytellers, and they deeply influenced Preston as he created this story. All the versions are the same story of Raven transforming and then finding the light and releasing it, but each story had different details that really brought to life the different activities, the different perils, the different areas where he really struggled, or when his human family struggled later on. And so what you're about to see is a collage of these stories that we've woven together, and to bring you a richer experience and an immersive experience as you walk through. Has anybody been to Southeast Alaska? So for those of you that have been there, we are evoking the sense of being in a rainforest. The different sounds that you hear, the rain, and also as you're going through, you're going to be hearing the voices of 2 different Tlingit storytellers telling this story in the language. We're not translating it, we're making it part of the environment, and we hope that you enjoy it. So we'll go through. Did you want to add anything before?
No, there's so much to tell about the whole, bringing the ideas together. Sort of worked in collaboration with Juniper Shui and Matt Starrett. Juniper is a video artist in his own right, so I wanted to create sort of an atmosphere of Alaska, and this kind of mystical, misty mist rolling out of the trees, and this kind of feeling, and so by doing that, it's enhancing the story. But it's also like a lot of the objects that were made, the cultural objects, were made for stagecraft. The masks were used to iterate the stories, and they were told at potlatches, winter ceremonies, and so this, I've always had kind of a pet interest in sort of vaudeville, kind of stagecraft and things that would be moving and the whole idea of magic and camera obscura. So this kind of takes it to that level that I was wanting to play with. So that's a little bit about it, and we'll get into more aspects of that as we go through.
Brian and Preston, I just wanted to thank you guys. I was telling Tammy earlier that it's a really cool opportunity for us to step aside. Obviously, we are not Tlingit and we are not Puyallup, and so to be able to host your story in our gallery is a really huge thing for us, and the work you guys have done over the last 4 years and 4 weeks has been really important for us. So thank you.
Thank you.
And we're really excited too that Connie McLeod, who is a cultural leader of the Puyallup, has been on the advisory committee for this exhibition for the museum, and that her and her Canoe family will be here for the opening on the 6th to do a formal welcome. She also did a blessing for us before we began installing the art, and just so that way we can go forward with the good intentions of bringing a Tlingit story to Puyallup territory, and through this specific story helping to share universal elements of all of our humanity.
Yeah.
A long time ago, Raven, who was our trickster figure, he was able to shift back and forth. Some people call it shape shift, some people call it transform, but he was able to change his shape and to denote that spiritual status and form that he was taking. Raven used to be a white bird, and so here he is as a white bird, and throughout the exhibit you'll see these white birds leading the path for you and for the visitors, leading us through the story. And here you'll see the projections that were created by Juniper and collaboration with Preston. Here we're showing the way that you see the mist, the mountains and the trees through the mist. You see them like that here, but even more so in Alaska. The way the water just kind of blends into the mountains and the landscape. It looks like that a lot down here too. It makes us feel like we're in our Tlingit home. But this is the feeling that we're getting as we go in through when the world was still in darkness.
One little aspect about the white raven is that in native cultures, the white animals, albino animals, are always thought of as supernatural beings. And so that's just one kind of hint that you get that Raven has these superpowers, that's kind of, it's true of like the white buffalo and supernatural white wolves and all across all of wildlife. When humans encounter these albino animals, they're thought of as being very special. So then, as a point marker, we have the other raven that's kind of leading you into the exhibition. Is there anything more you want?
Yeah, this opening line here of before here was here, Raven was only named Yesh. And so the L is a barred L. For those of you familiar with linguistics, it's an L with a slash through it. So it's pronounced THL. So when people ask you about it, it's Yesh. Yesh.
It's like when you think about how you're steaming milk. Yes, get into it. You can spit it out.
But
it's the only way that you can pronounce that word.
You can put your tongue on the front teeth and blow air out the sides.
Yes.
Yay. That's how to pronounce that word. And that is the word for raven in Tlingit. Well, the world was in darkness, and Raven decided that he was going to try to figure out a way to do something about this. So he flew, and he encountered the fishermen of the night in their canoe. And the fishermen, he asked them, "Where is the daylight?" And they said the daylight is being held. It's being captured and held by Nashak Sankawu, who is the nobleman at the head of the Nass River. And this blue line is the river, the salmon in it, and the fishermen. And they told Raven that Nashak Sankawu has a daughter, and every morning she drinks from the stream. And so Raven decided to go find her. As he flew, Raven, he saw the daughter and he saw the man. That's them over there on that side. And he decided that he would try to figure out a way to get inside of their house. You see the entrance to the clan house and the welcome poles that are right here. That is the entrance to the house that Raven tried to figure out a way to get in there. The first thing that he did was he turned himself into a piece of dirt. And he put himself inside of her drinking cup. But there is a technique for testing the purity of the water, which is to drag a feather through the water to see if anything sticks to the feather. Well, they drug the feather through the water and they discovered Raven, and that is him on that piece right behind you. That drop at the bottom is Raven in dirt form.
Yeah, and you can see encapsulated in the clear glass is a little speck of little dark piece of glass, and that's supposed to be Raven in that form.
When he was discovered, they threw out the water. They threw out the dirty water, and they tried again. And he decided that he would try to turn himself into a hemlock needle. And so up here, this mobile is Raven turning himself into a piece of a plant. He turned himself into a hemlock needle, which is the same color as the girl's drinking vessel. In some stories, she drinks out of a small metal box. In other stories, she drinks from a spoon, from a goat horn ladle. So the goat horn ladle is right there. She drank him, and she swallowed him. When she swallowed Raven in his hemlock needle form, she became pregnant. And this is her right behind over here. And this is her. She became pregnant through immaculate conception. And Raven started to change into a human baby. When she was about to give birth to this human baby, she had a really difficult time. They had lined the birthing pit with fine furs and everything that was outfitted for a person of high rank. But she had a very difficult time, and she was not able to give birth. They consulted with a wise elder, and she said that this baby does not want to be born into this finery. This baby wants to be born into a humble birth. So they replaced the fine furs with moss and old man's beard off of the trees. They lined it in the ground, and Raven was then able to be born as a human boy. This piece here in the middle is Raven turning into a human boy. So in this area we have transformation of him turning into dirt, of him turning into a hemlock needle and being drunk by the girl, of him turning into a human baby, and then him turning into a human boy. And all of this is his effort to gain access to their house and to their family. Did you want to add anything?
No, just one little note is again the daughter over here with the big tall hat, and I learned from speaking with different storytellers that the daughter is also transparent, and so that's why I made her in clear glass, and again that sort of also notates a supernatural being, and so that's the reason why she's clear glass.
And then how many of you saw Preston's mid-career retrospective. Then you remember the house posts and the glass screen from that show. And so here they are the literal entrance to the Clan House section of the exhibition. But we're so happy to be able to not have Preston make a whole new house screen. Yeah.
One thing I didn't have to do.
Yes, yes. But they mark the entrance, and you can enter from either side. But that's going to be the next move that we make.
Yeah.
Did anybody have any questions for this area?
Those are referred to as potlatch rings, which is a traditional ceremony which, it's often said that for each potlatch is hosted, you add a ring. I don't know if that's really true but it notates the high status of an individual. The rings, if you look at them, they're actually woven together. So it's not like you're adding a ring as you went, but in some cases they did. But in any case, that's what that is. Yeah, it's typically made out of cedar bark or spruce root weaving, a basket form. And then this screen is also representative of the interior, something that you would see in the inside of a clan house, and it's often would separate the chief's quarters from the rest of the big house, the big long house, where many families and relatives all lived in one house, in one big house. And then the chief would use this as almost like a theatrical, when he was come out to address his people, he would emerge from this little hole. This is thought of as the belly of the figure, the belly of the clan house, the belly of the community, the community house. And so I originally wanted to design this so people could walk through it. But Rebecca, who you may know, she would never allow me to do that. So you have to, maintain a certain amount of distance away from every piece of glass here. So. Yeah. But so, anyways, this was our piece from the 10 years ago. Yeah.
This light pattern, is there anything?
So this for me was a collaboration piece that I did with Juniper, who is an artist in his own right. He works in theater and he works in video projections, and he's an amazing artist. He helped me, figure out the design, the layout of the exhibition, and then how could we enhance the space with the video projections, which is kind of his specialty. So the video mapping, he's able to, frame it out so that all of the images that you see, fit neatly on the string, and which gives it a little extra dimension. In the case of this was the piece that we wanted to iterate that transformation. So we have, kind of a clan hat here with this kind of wispy vapor, kind of spiraling up, and then the raven human, sort of humanoid figure here. And he's kind of pointing everybody into the direction of the clan house. And this just iterates the whole transformation of raven into human form. So going this way.
Here, when you enter the clan house, you're greeted by the nobleman and his wife. That's who these two figures are. And both of these garments were designed and created by Dorothy Grant, who is a Haida fashion designer and good friend of Preston's. And we're very excited that she was able to collaborate, providing these regal people to this clan house. And here in this area, this is a display of wealth that includes a copper tana, not a shield, but another marker of status, of high status. And have you ever seen photographs of Tlingit homes from the turn of the century? They have baskets piled up, they have their rattles, they have their regalia, they're showing all of their cultural belongings. And for Tlingit people, it's called Atu, it means our belongings. And they usually signify clan relationships or clan membership. And all of these pieces are, as the kids say, Preston's flexing, showing off his skill in a wide variety of types of sculpture. And so here, even though some of them are showing spiritual connotations, like the rattles that might have been used by shaman or medicine people, but also utilitarian objects like the halibut hook and the fish club and the baskets. They are showing high rank because of how ornately they're decorated, but they're also showing that all of these pieces that we had in our homes, they did have a utilitarian function.
Yeah, almost everything, you know, it's well documented that the Alaskan, or the coastal people from Vancouver area on up to Tlingit territory made these objects that was very similar. They differ in cultural styles, but they made, boxes and bowls and rattles and baskets, and it was all very, very similar until you understand the cultural styles. So I try to make my work look more like Tlingit style, as opposed to the Haida, the Tsimshian, people. And it all looks very, very similar until you understand that, that is a certain design sensibility that each culture had. You would think it's all the same. And so, just a real variety of different techniques. You're getting more and more complex, over the, whole exploration of 30 years working with this style, both the design work and the sculptural style. And so these are all basically representative of objects that you might see from the community or in a museum sometimes today. So they're inspired by utilitarian objects. And on the back up here, there's one, again, iterating that transformation of raven to human. There's a transformation mask, which was, a lot of these objects and masks were used as stagecraft for storytelling, and that was, my way of iterating that style there.
So is that transforming out of the hemlock?
So it's transforming from a raven to human. So if you were to close that, you would see a raven design on it that, actually, I don't know if you, I'm going to do it.
Oh!
So you've got, actually it might even be a better way of displaying it because you can see the raven opening.
So he's flying now.
Yeah.
Is that blue a copper? Is that a copper? The blue?
This is actually a piece of what is referred to as neck armor. So there's a piece of wood that the warriors would put on, and then they'd have a helmet, a war helmet that was similar to, this is inspired by a war helmet. They don't really go together, but that's what they're inspired by. And so, oftentimes they would have slats. They were tethered together, woven together around their midsection. They would have this neck gauntlet. They would have a war helmet to protect them from, an attacker. And that's a comb, yeah. So that's, again, fairly literal. This is a halibut hook. This is the eagle rattle. This is a grease bowl, a grease dish. And very specifically, this is a raven rattle, and this one is an oyster catcher rattle. We've got the Fish Club over here, and then all the way on the left is a hat form that actually is goes all the way back to the original inspiration that I had for as a glass blower to make this bowl shape, which turn it upside down, it's like a hat. And then with the shadow effect, that was sort of the aha moment in my development as an artist. Yeah. This is a called a tinag. It's also referred to as a copper, and this was made out of a piece of steel that was pounded out and then sometimes scribed on with the clan design. And in this case, I made it as an eagle, the little beak. This T-bone, or this T here, represents the backbone of the family. So the shoulders and the backbone, and then those slashes represent the ribs, the rib cage. So you can see how lateral interpretation we have of certain things when we make symbolism within the object. And all these baskets are inspired by Tlingit baskets. These are all designs that I've studied through looking at different books. A lot of the books, or a lot of the baskets in the turn of the century were made as trade items, tourist items. And so it became a market for that when the Europeans came to Alaska.
In this area, this is all of the nobleman's wealth. And so this is a display of his wealth. And the display continues on into the next room. So
When
we're
they
gonna
had a potlatch, would this be on display when people came for a potlatch?
Yeah, theoretically. I mean,
Did
the
they-
thing is,
did
the
they-
potluck, it's never the same way twice.
Yeah.
There are photos that I've looked at. This stair step is basically around the perimeter of the clan house was always like these tiered stair steps that would go down to the central fire pit. And so there was a photo that I looked at from the whale house in Klukwan, and there was, guys, standing there in front of all of their wealth, these very proud individuals, and they had boxes and baskets and masks and things. So it would be wrong to say that that's how it always was. They may have been brought out and showed and
Staged.
Did they trade these items or no?
Yeah,
gave
they
them all
did.
away.
They
Yeah,
traded, they gifted.
But mostly.
I mean, the potlatch is a very complicated ceremony. There's a lot of things were addressed during the potlatch ceremony, such as giving of names, raising of totem poles, singing, dancing, storytelling, bringing out new masks and new objects that would be gifted to the host of the potlatch. It would be, all varieties of things. They typically last for days, like about a week long. So a chief would have to amass a certain amount of material wealth, blankets and objects and things and food to host all of these people. There'd be neighboring clans that were invited. They would be hosted for up to 7 or 8 days, and then you would always leave with a sort of gift, an acknowledgement for your participation.
Did the Canadians stop them from doing potlatches?
Well, they stopped them all up and down the coast.
Mainly because they
before.
were bankrupt.
Yeah, it wasn't exclusively Canadian. Also, the Americans, before they drew a line through Canada and U.S., there was all one culture, and they didn't like. Apparently, it was not. It was thought of as conspicuous consumption and debaucherous of some sort. I don't know. There was, for various reasons, they tried to outlaw the potlatch system, but they always went on in secret, and they still go on today.
What's the figure they had with the teeth at the end there?
Well, that's a seal, so that's just a way of iterating the. Oftentimes they would use, and we would use the perca with shell to make teeth in masks. So I use little glass rods, and then I grind them and put them in. Yeah.
What is the display shelf? Is that cedar, the wood?
This is cedar, yeah, it's a cedar veneer. But I wanted the cedar, to look like a traditional clan house.
Well, in the story, the man, the nobleman, he had all of this wealth, and his most prized possessions were the boxes of the daylight, the stars, the moon, and the sun. And when Raven came into his life as his grandson, it quickly overshadowed his relationship with these objects. His relationship with his grandson became the most important thing to him. And as we'll see in the next section, it caused a lot of tension in his family.
You want to say something about the two?
Oh, these are dance staffs, and they're carried by the people who are in the front of dance groups. And a lot of times they'll be moved like this with the beat of the drum. And so then the way that they're anchored right here, they create an archway. And you see this for Tlingit dance groups, but also for Tsimshian and Haida dance groups as well. There'll be a dance staff archway, and the dancers will follow and then walk through the archway. And here they are in the form of eagle and raven. There's two clans, two primary clans for Tlingit people, the raven side and the eagle side, and then there's sub-clans underneath each of those. But that represents the balance that Tlingit people are always striving for, is the duality. We're always trying to put things into balance, and one way that we do that through our clans is the eagle and the raven side. So if you're from the eagle side, you're supposed to marry somebody from the raven side. So it helps create that and maintain that balance for us culturally.
And then which clan did the children from that union be part of?
The children always follow the mother's clan. Well, in the story, this area represents where the nobleman had his most prized possessions, the box of stars, the box with the moon, and the box with the sun. Now, when his grandchild entered his life, the grandchild wanted to play with all of his treasure, and probably started off with the things over there on the tiered steps, and then worked his way over to these. And his grandfather at first didn't want to give him any of these because they were so precious to him. But one by one, the grandfather let his grandson play with these boxes. And first he played with the box with the stars, and the little boy opened up the box and the stars went up into the sky. When he realized what he did, the grandson just cried and cried and cried, and he felt so terrible for what he did for releasing his grandfather's treasure. And eventually the grandfather forgave his grandson, and in a way to help console him, he gave him the box with the moon in it. And the little boy, in some stories, he took the moon out and played with it like a ball, and then let it go, and it went up through the smoke hole and took its place in the sky. In other stories, as soon as he opened up the lid, the moon went up through the smoke hole and took its place in the sky. But in any rate, the grandfather was upset, the grandson was upset, and they went through the cycle again. And when the grandfather ultimately forgave his grandson because he loved him so much, he wanted to give him the box with the sun in it. This caused an argument between the boy's mother and the boy's grandfather, because the boy's mother said, "What are you gonna do? He's gonna do it again. He saw what he did to the stars and the moon." And the grandfather thought about it, and he finally let him play with the box with the sun in it. as you go through and you take your tours through, it's up to you if you want to tell the story, if you want to let them read the panels. The panel is behind you. And then the text panel is down here. The story, the very abbreviated version is what I just told you, but that's also on the wall. So it's up to you to make the story your own and decide how you want to lead the visitors through. Go to the next one. Or did you want to say something about the projections?
No, I mean, this video projection came as kind of as a bonus. You know, we tried to iterate that feeling of space and these objects that are floating up into the sky. But what we came up with was the idea of this photograph of this box here, and made it feel like as though, like the again, an interior clan house kind of feel, like the screen in the back of the clan house representing the house itself. So yeah, that's about it. That's all I have for that.
And then it's just drawn on the back of the glass.
This is the projection. It's actually a photograph of this box. Yeah, so it's projected here. And then, kind of like a collage. Oh, you know, are you doing? Yeah. Oh, me or you?
I can.
Oh, yeah.
Well, right here, at the beginning of the gallery, I told you that we have taken several different stories and we've put them together to tell this one story. Now, in some of the stories, Raven sneaks the sunlight, the daylight out when everybody's sleeping, and he releases it while they're sleeping. And in some of the stories, he opens up the boxes one by one, and the stars, the moon, and the sun go out through the smoke hole. In this story that we're telling here, he does that. He releases them one by one. And when his grandfather realized that he was tricked, he holds on to his feet and he holds him with the smoke flowing over his body. And so even though he was leaving with the sun and taking it into the world, he is being changed black by the smoke.
He's changed back from the boy to the raven.
Correct.
Yes,
Yeah.
depending on which story. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, in
Yeah.
the story, he decided a long time ago that he was tired of being a human.
Boy, yeah.
He was done with this mess and he wanted to go back to being a bird. But when in this piece, he is bringing the sunlight into the worlds. It's a big So in this area, this is when Raven has brought the daylight into the world. And as the stars were going out into the sky, people were seeing a little bit more. When the moon took its place in the sky, they saw a little bit more and started becoming afraid. And when the sunlight hit the world, everybody got very scared and ran away. And depending on the regalia that they were wearing, they became the people of that area. So the people that were wearing feather regalia, they jumped up into the sky and they became the winged people. The people that were wearing regalia from creatures in the water, they became the water creatures. The ones that ran into the forest, they became the forest creatures. And the ones right here that stood strong and brave became the Tlingit people. They became humans. And so in this area, these shows the different realms that were created when the daylight hit the world. And we talk about in here how Raven was covered in soot after his grandfather found out that he had been tricked. And he was changed into a black bird. And you can see this black bird right here. showing how he would have changed in color.
No, but if you stand here long enough, you'll start to see this kind of sunrise, and then these people emerging and dissolving, contemplating what's going on in their world and around them. And we'll promise to have the genie lifts moved before the show opens, but
You truly are behind the scenes.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but that's essentially the story.
Oh my goodness. I can see that it took 4 years.
Yeah, yeah. It was a lot of conceptualizing and 3 or 4 years of really busy time working on all these pieces. So.
Did you introduce any new techniques to yourself in the show? Did you experiment with something and find a way of, I don't know. I mean, I know this, they look different.
Yeah, these sort of multi-construction figures, like this is 4 pieces of glass. So I've got the torso, the mask, the head, the hat, and then this element on the top. So yeah, that is kind of a new interpretation of how to illustrate the clan ancestors, you know, so the way the boxes are illuminated is kind of a new technique as well. The most recent piece, I think, though, is the canoe form. That the fabrication of that canoe was very time-consuming, creating, you know, layers of color in a piece of glass, and then water jet cutting it to the shape, and then putting it back into the kiln and slumping it into this form, into a mold, to get sort of the contour of the canoe. Then after that was done, then I took it into my studio. I covered the entire piece with rubber tape, and then I drew onto the piece. I removed the areas that were to be carved, and then sandblasting is the technique that I use for all of this work. So most all of the work. You can kind of see the sharp edge of the stencil material and how much detail you can get just with the sandblasting process. You know, in the case of these woven robes, these are just very thin slits of vinyl tape that are applied and then blasted at different stages. So, you know, creating that sort of texture. You know, a lot of these are inspired by blanket designs from Chilcat blankets. There's a specialized weaving technique. You can see some of that patterning on the garments that are in there. Those are actually woven and then sewn fabric details. But if you look at the smallest, you know, finest details, you'll see it's actually a weaving. And then
Is that tape left on here or no? The tape is there just to pattern it and then it's removed? The tape
yes,
is-
yeah.
tape
No,
is just
it's used to carve against the pattern, and then it's removed.
It's built in.
And then so it's removed at this point.
We did a canoe at the after show at Red Hot a few years ago. And was that your first of the canoes? 'Cause you brought it-
No, I've been developing that in a blown form, you know, for a little while, and I kind of revisit different shapes, you know, every couple of years. Sometimes I'll go back and I'll make a whole new series of canoes, and I'll change the designs and what have you. Yeah, but that was yeah.
When these, so this is a little different technique, so it's got kind of variated. How do you do that?
Well,
Is that
it's the same technique basically, but it's just the areas that were removed and then carved. Like the basket technique, you'll see that so once you remove some of the tape and then you continue to blast, the surface of the glass continues to be worn down. So at one point this had color on it and then it was removed. So but it retained the texture because of the patterning of the tape that was laid
And
down.
the dimpling is from that.
Yeah. So a lot of detailed work, very, subtle, but a lot of detail.
Because people will ask, for example, how many hours went into designing and preparing? Just one pulver, for example.
It's really hard to say because these are all made in different sessions. So this is made with 3 pieces of glass. So I made these in one session. I made these in a different session. I made this hat in a different session. And then they were all kind of constructed. I mean, it's really, I don't know, I'd say like 30 hours and 30 years and 50 hours.
Could you share with the docents what you were saying about how you composed the soundtrack with Juniper for the press tour?
Right.
I
So
love that.
Since I kind of moonlight as a musician, I have a music group that is kind of involves native themes, and so I wanted to bring the music component in here, kind of enhance the experience. And so in the front, you hear the rain. So it's basically several different sounds that were sort of tethered together to be triggered over the day. So you won't hear the same configuration of sounds in the same way all throughout the day, and it'll change. And so, anyway, just trying to evoke the idea of the sunrise, evoke the idea of like a heavy forest and darkness, trying to evoke the feeling of space, and wind, rain and fire. So there's the different sounds that you'll hear, also with the frogs and ravens and things like that filtering through.
What's it, birds behind it?
Yeah, those are birds. This is a video that was taken. So it's actually several different layers of video that are being projected at the same time and then splayed out across the whole space. Yeah, again, just trying to iterate the feeling of sunlight from darkness. Yeah, and that was, and again, Juniper Shuey, who was like the, is an artist in his own right. He's in the theater and video projecting art pieces, and so we started to collaborate, 3 years ago on the idea of doing this show and mapping out the exhibition and using the technique of video projection to create the backdrop.
Are the faces based on masks?
Yeah, they're kind of typical mask forms, and if you look at them, you'll see, this is a shark design. Some of them are obviously female figures, some are male figures, but they're kind of inspired by, different kinds of portrait masks or sort of, at a potlatch there was often like these stamps, like make a bear. The Bear Clan would have like a bear paw on their cheek, and they would push it on your cheek, and you'd enter into the party, and you'd be looking pretty sharp. But all refers back to clans, specific clans. So this is just kind of a general sampling, rather than saying this is the origin of the clans. I tried to represent a variety, and let's see what else about that. I had another thought on, on the tip of my tongue, but yeah. Anyway, I forgot.
Is there a museum, like maybe in Canada, that has some original masks like this, like
Sure.
UBC?
Yeah. UBC.
Sorry, the big one in
Yeah, and there's a really good collection at the Seattle Art Museum, the John Halbert collection. Portland Art Museum has some really good materials. Denver, Yeah.
Doesn't the Burke Museum have some?
The Burke Museum too, yes. Yeah.
Preston, what's a thunderbird? Is it just a supernatural? There's not a real correlate bird, right?
Yeah, I mean, I know that it's a clan symbol, and I know that it's a supernatural bird. I don't really have any stories per se about the Thunderbird, but there's a Thunderbird clan. Yeah. It's Tlingit, but I think it's also even all the way out to Vancouver Island, like west coast of Vancouver Island. There's big Thunderbirds. The one thing I know about Thunderbirds is that they're so large that they could grab a killer whale out of the water. They were that big.
I noticed these three all have the large lower lip.
Yeah. Yeah, these are female figures. They have a labret that is like a piercing. It was often a little stud was put in there. Sometimes they're bigger and they're like, you know, like the Africans would have a big plate almost, you know?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it's decoration and.
Yeah, it's just, it just kind of notates a noble woman.
Noble,
Yeah.
status.
Yeah. Usually only the nobility had the librets.
Still done at all?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes people just put like a small stud there.
Yeah.
Or they'll put something they can attach, a little piece of abalone or something. So they don't quite go the big ones anymore. No. I haven't seen it.
I'm sorry, they have like an eye mask effect?
You know, they're just inspired by different sort of face painting, you know, potlatch form or potlatch context. A lot of when these potlatch ceremonies came together, people would bring on their blankets and their hats and things and their best objects that represent the family. And sometimes they'd be painted, you know, sometimes it'd be lines, sometimes just like a black slash across the eyes.
So that would be painted, not like a Lone Ranger mask?
No, especially up in what I understood up in the Chilkat territory, up in Haines, Alaska region, Klukwan, and so forth. But actually, you know, as well as Sitka, which was where my grandmother came from, great-grandmother came from.
Are they ever tattooed?
Oh yes, yeah. There was a lot of examples of tattoos.
On the face, some of these designs on the.
Sometimes there'd be lines on the chin. Sometimes, you know, across the whole chest. You know, arms and what have you. Yeah. It kind of, I think it went away in a lot of ways. It kind of almost disappeared, but I have some friends that are kind of reviving the tradition now, and there's examples and drawings in museums about tattoo designs. They're always very simple line. Sometimes they're not like filled in like the black. I mean, more traditionally, you see people taking the black and red designs and doing tattoos like that. But in the old days, they're almost just black lines.
Are your heads blown and then hot sculpted, or
These are so the thing about these head forms, they're actually blown into a mold. So you can see the similar proportion of every piece is almost, you know, identical, but then the color and the designs kind of change it and give it a different feel.
Do they represent specific people that you know who are part of your life?
Pardon?
Do they represent specific people in your past?
Oh, you know, kind of indirectly. I mean, I'm killer whale, so there's a killer whale representation over here. The red design there's a killer whale. Yeah.
Is a different text.
Well, this particular one here was rolled into silver leaf, And so the color reacted with the silver leaf, and then at one point it all looked like this. And then when I matted it down, when I frosted the majority of the design and left this shiny, then that became sort of the contrast.
Oh, it started that way.
Yeah, and at one point this was all shiny all the way across, almost like salmon skin in a lot of ways.
Well, this side is different too.
Yeah, and then most every other, you've got some shiny matte kind of combinations. Like the Thunderbird over there's got some shiny highlights, which is a special color that reacts with the gas in the furnace when you're working on it, and it oxidizes and creates sort of a shiny mirror, or almost like oil on water effect.
Do you have any last year questions?
This is Merlin. This is was used as ornamentation and kind of, like a warm hat, a fur hat. But this is called a chaquette. This is a frontlet. It was often worn like a little headband with a carved wooden piece here. I use iridescent glass here to mimic the idea of abalone. You can catch the highlights. It's kind of got a mirror.
Yes.
Like it's a dichroic glass, which has this real reflective colored surface.
To mimic what? I didn't catch that. You said to mimic.
Abalone.
abalone.
Abalone
Okay.
inlays for
Yeah.
masks and different objects.
Do we have any last questions for either Miranda or Preston?
I'm just overwhelmed. This is
Yeah,
such a
thank you.
wonderful.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you.